Stories from Maine is a collection of true tales and legendary stories of daring, heroism, absurdity, disaster, and spectacle, all proving why many of the greatest legends in American history are our stories from Maine. One of the worst events in Maine history took place in the fall of 1947, when wildfires spread all across the Pine Tree State and throughout New England. When it was over, long-standing landmarks were gone, homes and businesses lay in heaps of ash, scores were homeless and unemployed, and the great state of Maine would be forever changed. Stay with us and revisit the true story of the Great Maine Fire of 1947, next on this episode of Stories from Maine. Our podcast begins right now.
This is our Stories from Maine podcast for June 28, 2025. Stories from Maine is authored by historian Lori Suzanne Dell. Her books, Stories from Maine and Stories from Maine 2, as well as all of her books, are available through book retailers and can be found on Amazon. Stories from Maine is leaving Spotify. As of July 1, 2025, all of our podcast episodes will stream only on our YouTube channel. So, subscribe to our channel on YouTube at Stories from Maine for all of our future episodes and much more. You can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram at Stories from Maine. And you can email us at storiesfrommaine@gmail.com.
After 12 long years of the Great Depression and nearly 5 years of war in Europe and in the Pacific, things were just beginning to get back to normal in the summer of 1947. Tourism was a vital summer trade in New England. And many sought to escape the heat of the inner cities of Boston and New York by taking in the cooler climate of Maine. "1947 would be one of the best summer seasons in more than a decade. However, an epic drought was taking a toll on Maine's agriculture, and the forests of the Pine Tree State were dangerously parched. Farms were dust dry, and crops were failing. And what happened next, in early October of 1947, would change everything. Here now is the story of the Great Maine Fire of 1947.
On October 7th of 1947, fire departments throughout the state of Maine were being called out in nearly every town as numerous fires were popping up all over the Pine Tree State. From Maine's southernmost border to her northernmost boundaries, scores of brush and woods fires were raging everywhere. Fire departments were stretched beyond their limits as winds began to blow, and the fires began to spread. Soon, the state of Maine was a growing inferno. Manpower to aid firefighters in this fierce battle were in short supply, and the availability of accessible water supplies to fight these fires was also limited, as the drought had reduced the levels of ponds, streams, rivers, and wells. It was soon quite clear to everyone that the entire state of Maine was quickly burning out of control.
Now for a direct report on the scene, here's W.W. Chaplin at station WCSH, Portland, Maine.
This is the fourth week of the Indian summer drought. I flew to Portland by Northeast Airlines today, low over the Kennebunk region, where the greatest damage has been done.
We are flying at approximately 1,000 feet up in the air, directly over the Great Fire area in Maine. A moment ago, we looked ahead and saw a high purple wall of smoke that looked as if we couldn't possibly break through. But then we penetrated that, and now we're in the fire area itself. The ground is half hidden. You can see great columns of smoke rising through the general pall that covers this whole part of the country.
Forest fires whipped by 40-mile winds face large sections of New England tonight with their worst crisis ever outside of war. Some fires are out of control again in Massachusetts, pretty well held in New Hampshire, on the rampage worse than ever here in Maine. Portland itself is a walled city, walled with sky-high smoke. In half a dozen directions you can see the shooting orange flames. They've ridden the windstorm within 5 miles of the city limits. I have just come back from a tour of the closest fire front. The outlook is bad. Toward Biddeford Pool, the flames are solid. I watched the pine woods go at Waterboro. East Brownfield is destroyed. South Portland is in emergency status.
10,000 acres, it's estimated, have already been burned over. The fire is still going on, controlled in most places, but the fire still burns.
The northeastern states are under a pall of smoke, the symbol of millions of dollars in damage mounting by the hour.
No relief by rain is yet in sight. The wind still howls across the miles of fire.
And in Portland, Maine, Governor Horace A. Hildreth appealed to the people of that state to organize on a wartime basis tonight to combat forest fires. He says they're causing the greatest economic catastrophe in the state's history.
Down the coast, it's worse than ever at Kennebunk. Sanitariums at Biddeford, Maine and Fitchburg, Massachusetts have been evacuated. But last word from Biddeford hospitals was, send ambulances, as many as you can, as soon as you can. East Waterboro. 3/4 of the town has been wiped out. Brownfield, East Brownfield and Brownfield Center are blackened waste. 250 buildings have been destroyed. West Kennebunk. Flames have reached within 3/4 of a mile of the town. Evacuation is now taking place. Here's a special item. The President today proclaimed the Maine fires a national disaster. Volunteers from the New England states and New York join in the general fight. The National Guard is mobilizing, the Legion is all out, relief agencies are collecting and distributing food and clothing to tens of thousands of refugees and firefighters. No relief by rain is yet in sight. The wind still howls across the miles of fire. Bar Harbor is ablaze, but few confirmed details so far. Roads closed and communications out. One report says 2,000 residents are on the docks there, waiting Coast Guard evacuation by sea.
One great trouble has been to get the inhabitants, all of them, to leave their threatened homes. Just an hour or so ago, authorities warned remaining residents that if they didn't leave at once, the road to the mainland might have to be closed. A shifting wind might cut that road again and also send the Holocaust riding straight into Northeast Harbor, a community second only to Bar Harbor itself. Telephone men have been working 4 days almost without sleep to keep rescue lines open. Order has been brought out of chaos by the state police with their radio automobiles. I'm speaking from Ellsworth, Maine, the Red Cross haven for refugees from Bar Harbor and other evacuated communities of Mount Desert Island. That's been one of the great peril points of the past days.
Already there are about 1,500 people, refugees here,
from the Mount Desert area. The Red Cross, however, tells me that they are set up so that they can handle as many as 6,000 people in this one town and small villages surrounding it as they come in. Those people have come in from Mount Desert, from Bar Harbor. Some of them came with nothing left in the world but the clothes on their backs, and those were pretty well worn. So the town has been turned over to them. Churches, the Masons' Hall, the Oddfellows' Hall, the schools. The schools have been stopped here for the moment. The desks have been pushed back, cots have been put into the schoolroom. People are sleeping there. Here in the shadow of the blast furnace blaze in the ravaged island, there are already more than 1,500 refugees. Because among these 1,500 refugees already here, there are about 200 babies and older children. There are central kitchens in the town, and everyone now, I think, is getting hot food. They've been eating sandwiches for days and days, as you know. On the island itself, a blackout region tonight because power has failed. All of New England is still a tinderbox. There has already been some looting on the island, but tonight the National Guard has moved in and that will be stopped.
We're standing at the northeast harbor end of the Eagle Lake Road here. Quite a bit of activity. State police are on. We have one of the members of I believe it's the Northeast Harbor Fire Department there. One of the Northeast Harbor Fire Department members, and he could answer a few questions for us. Now, what is your name, please? Alfred James. Well, would you say at this moment this is the worst fire on the island now, Mr. James? I believe at this moment it possibly is the worst fire as far as I know. And beyond that, I guess we're just hoping to stop it here.
The fire is to a certain extent contained. There are hundreds of volunteer firefighters. I'm giving you this report from Ellsworth over facilities of radio station WLBZ, Bangor, Maine. This is W.W. Chaplin in the forest fire area near Bar Harbor, Maine.
The Great Maine Fire of 1947 is still considered the worst natural calamity in Maine history. Nearly 1,000 homes and over 400 summer cottages were lost. More than 250,000 acres of Maine forests and lands were consumed. 9 towns were completely destroyed. Tens of millions of dollars in damage and losses were recorded. more than 2,500 Mainers were left homeless. Yet, without blinking an eye, these hardened people banded together. They rebuilt the towns, cleaned up the damage. Then, they got back on with their lives. And these Mainers took steps to help prevent such future disasters from ever occurring again. New laws regulating land preservation and forest conservation were created, and more volunteer fire departments were produced. These Maine men and women survived the Great Depression and a world at war on two fronts. Now, they had survived the worst natural disaster in Maine history. Maybe this is why these hardened and tough Mainers are better known today as the greatest of their generation, and why the Great Maine Fire of 1947 is one of the most catastrophic of our Stories from Maine.
We hope you have enjoyed this week's feature story. All new weekly episodes of our Stories from Maine weekly podcast stream each Saturday on our YouTube channel. In the meantime, join us and more than 40,000 followers on our Facebook page, where we post new Maine history content daily. Thanks for listening.
Our weekly Stories from Maine article, published in the Brunswick, Maine newspaper, The Times Record, can be found on newsstands each Friday and can be viewed online. The Stories from Maine logos are a registered trademark of Lori Suzanne Dell, and all original content is copyright 2025, with all rights reserved. Please come back next Saturday for another all-new episode of Stories from Maine.